All righty. Well, thank you again for joining the UC Davis Health Professions Advising Office's App Prep program. Our session today is going to be primary application submission strategies and next steps. So thank you all again for joining us today. Don't forget, or friendly reminder, that HPA continues to serve all UC Davis students and alumni, no matter when they graduated, no matter what major they are, to continue supporting them throughout their entire journey. So congratulations to the upcoming class of 2024, or if you've already graduated early, HPA is still going to be here for you, and you still have access to the same services as if you were still a student with us. So you can still definitely come to our events. You can still come to our Zoom drop-ins or schedule appointments or give us a call. All of that is going to be the same. We do not go away. We know that this is a really stressful part in your journey, and we want to be able to support you every step of the way, including personal statement revisions, interview prep, all of those great topics and questions we're sure that you have. And like I mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to put it in the chat for everyone or to DM me as well. All of those things are welcome and definitely encouraged. It also helps me as a presenter today. Okay, I do want to shout out, we do have drop-in advising and appointments. How they're similar is that they are both one-on-one with staff advisors. Everyone is invited, particularly applicants, and all questions and topics are welcome, including personal statement and other application revisions. HPA staff are trained on knowing what are health professional schools, what are admissions folks looking for in these application components, so we can give direct feedback to support you all in making those changes. Some differences are that drop-ins are 15 minutes, they're first come, first serve, but you're welcome to attend as many drop-ins as you'd like. There are some students I see every day at drop-ins, and we ended up spending, roughly 45 minutes together for the week. And for our appointments, they are 30 minutes. They are scheduled in advance, and we can only have one appointment in the system at a time. However, you are able to go to drop-ins and appointments together at the same time. So we can double dip with both of those options together. And not on this slide, but we also have express advising over the phone. So if you do have a quick question or you're not sure where to go or who to go to on or off campus, you can give us a quick call and our staff there can also help guide you with what resource might make the most sense for your situation. Any thoughts or questions so far? Yes. For the link to the appointment system, I can include that at the end. Yes. Okay, again, please feel free to continue putting the questions in the chat. Super helpful. So my presentations tend to be fairly interactive, so I'll be asking you additional questions as well. So our first question is, do you think this is a truth or a myth? You have to submit on the first day of the application opening to be early. Myth. Great job, everyone. This is a pretty big myth that we see online, that applicants think they have to submit on the first day to be early. And that is not a true statement. I work with so many applicants, and I mean the majority of the applicants we work with, they are submitting later. So our goal is to submit early still. So within about 4 to 6 weeks of the application cycle opening. And so for most applicants, that would put us in the June or early July timeframe. So we want to submit early, but we also want to submit ready, right? We don't want to hit submit just to hit submit. We do want to be able to have that chance to get feedback for revisions. Chances are there probably going to be a lot of feedback for us. And our goal at HPA is that you like your writing more and more over time, and that we can support you reflect to really show why are you a good fit for schools, or why are you ready to go on to being a health professional student. And that does take some time. And sometimes applicants wonder, well, what if I just hit submit just to see how it goes? Well, at the end of the day, it's always up to you. and we will support your decisions, absolutely. But if we're, debating on, should I submit in the second week of June just to see, or should I take an extra couple of weeks just, to continue building on feedback, we would encourage, let's get some feedback, even if that puts us into, that early July timeframe. We are still good to go. And again, HPA is here for all of your questions that you have. We want to support you throughout your journey. This tends to be a pretty big topic. Any thoughts or questions on this one? Okie dokie. Next one. I can use my Davis official transcript for transfer coursework or transferred coursework when putting in the entry portion of the application. I see one myth, two myths. It is going to be a myth. So what we highly encourage is for every higher education institution you attend, we highly recommend let's get the official transcript from that institution directly and send it to yourself and the application service or services that you're using. Because things happen, right? Just because you took that class at a community college or another four-year university doesn't mean it transferred over to Davis, but you still have that record in the big system. And the reason why we encourage getting those official transcripts is because we don't want your application to be held up because something is missing like that. So that's why we highly recommend, let's get that official transcript, let's send it to yourself and the application services so we know we're not going to be missing anything. Good news is we do have a video dedicated to that from this series on our YouTube channel. It's also available through our App Prep program page where we talk about, well, how do we actually request transcripts from Davis, whether you're an alumni and you can CAS authenticate or you can't. Good news is it's super easy. If you did take courses at another institution, whether it was community college, another UC, another four-year, then you're going to want to double check their website to see how do they do that process. But usually it's pretty straightforward and we're just following the directions they have. Any thoughts or questions on this? Okay. Next one is I have to submit all of my schools at once in order to start the verification process. Truth or myth? Ooh, good work, everyone. And this is a myth. So you can submit just one school to start the verification process. And while you're being verified, we can continue to add schools over time. And even after you're done through the verification process, we can continue to add schools later as well. We only go through verification one time. Wonderful question in the chat. What exactly is the verification process? And that kind of takes us to our vocab recap for today. We're just figuring out what are these big words that we're going to hear all the time. So we're going to start off with rolling admissions versus deadline admissions. Any thoughts here from anyone on what rolling admissions versus deadline admissions means? Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute. Rolling admissions accepts people as they apply. Deadline, they only review after the deadline. Rolling acceptances over time, deadline reviewed. Yep. So basically, deadline admissions means that they're usually waiting for the deadline to review applications. Some smaller programs could be like this, for example, like physical therapy or even select PA or nursing programs, but we definitely want to double check websites on what they say about this. Most health professional schools are on rolling admissions, and that definitely does include pretty much all med schools, all dental schools and the majority of like nursing and PA and other schools like that. So rolling admissions means they don't wait for the deadline to review materials. They review applications, complete applications as they receive them. And they give out, secondaries and interviews and ultimately acceptances over time. And so the number of seats that they have does go down over time, which is why we encourage that we submit early and ready in order to help more strategically apply in the timeline that schools are using. And really quick tidbit on deadline. Technically, vet schools, the vast majority of them are on the deadline admission, but for deadline admission schools, we do not encourage waiting for the deadline to apply because they can have extra rules, like you have to be verified by the deadline, or you have to have all of your materials by then. And so we do encourage submitting a few weeks, at least in advance, if possible, for deadline admissions, just in case we do need extra time to fill out any additional materials or provide any additional materials. Any thoughts or questions about rolling or deadline admissions? Okie dokie. So verification, what is it? So verification is when this starts once we hit submit on the primary application. So that would mean we've filled everything out. We've finalized our personal statement, our experiences writing. Oh, Brandon, do you have a question? So we've submitted the primary application, we finalized our personal statement, experiences, we've included letter writers' information so they can upload it. Ideally, we have our test scores in, and we've also done the transcript entry portion, and we've hit submit. Now, what happens is the application service is double checking. So they have the transcript and they're double checking, is everything correct? Do they agree with what you've input into the transcript entry portion? For example, do we have the right letter grades? Do we have the right titles, etc.? Did we essentially copy and paste that information? And then from there, they're double checking, did we categorize things correctly, right? Like is bio, Biz 2A in the bio category, is OChem in the OChem category, and those things. So they're just double checking, did you input that information correctly? That is all they are verifying. That does take differing amounts of time for each application service, and the amount of time does change depending on when we are at in the cycle. But in general, we tend to encourage buffering about 4 to 6 weeks of the application to be verified. And then once you've done being verified, they agree with you, everything's all good to go. That is when they start sending your application to schools. Schools do not receive it before then. Ooh, great question about study abroad. Whether you're applying to med school, dental school, etc., they actually have guides that you can look up to read more about what they say about what to do. Good news, it's usually pretty straightforward when it's through the UC EAP study abroad. So I recommend reading through the guide. If you are applying to medical school, we do have the updated links up on the medicine page under resources and helpful links on the right-hand side. We are working through the other health professions, but you can definitely still Google it. So again, verification takes upwards of about 4 to 6 weeks. Ooh, great question. Can you submit for verification without the MCAT? You technically can submit your application, your primary application, without knowing your test score. However, we typically encourage waiting for it. That way you know what score you have with your application. let's say the timing just isn't really working out, and we do want to hit submit, then from there, we usually only encourage applying to one school until we find out what that score is, so that we can start the application process and we're not sending it all out. And the reason why we encourage that caution is because we know how expensive this is, and we want to ensure that you're applying with an application that you have as much information as possible. And of course, these tests are hard, right? And sometimes things happen. And again, we just want to make sure that you're comfortable with what you're submitting. When folks do have questions, like specifically like, this is when I'm going to take it, when do you recommend? I encourage that we chat about that at the end of our session today or at a drop-in or scheduled appointment. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions about verification? Okie dokie. Now for a complete application. So let's say you've been verified. Now when do schools actually start screening your application? And so to have a complete application and in order to review your application, schools are gonna, need that primary application to be verified. And it says DAT, but I just meant to say like any test score, like MCAT, DAT, OAT, GRE if required. And then letters of rec that meet their requirements. So at the stage of submitting secondaries, in order to have a complete application, that's when we want to have those letters of rec submitted by. The exception, of course, is deadline schools. We want everything all together. And then supplementals, those secondaries, including the fee payment, and if required, a situational judgment test like the Casper, etc. So all of those things go into having a complete application, and that's when schools start reviewing your application. Most schools give supplementals to everyone, but some schools do a little screening first and then they give you a supplemental. So that's going to be a little different depending on the school. And for situational judgment test, most of them, like Casper, it says it on their website that they want you to take it, so we just take it. But some situational judgment tests like Kira, they might be by invitation only. So again, we want to be double checking websites because this is schools admissions websites because this will have the most updated information and what are their expectations, basically. We are going to say this in just a moment, but just to let you all know, for supplementals, for allopathic medical schools, supplementals are going to be sent after the primary application. But for most other professions, they're embedded in the primary application, and we need to finish them in order to hit submit on a school. Great question. Does Davis School of Medicine send secondaries to everyone? I do give the caveat, I do not work for the School of Medicine, but to my understanding, they do have a pre-screening before they decide to send secondaries. So it is to select applicants. Another good question. To clarify, should you have your letters of rec ready when you submit your primary app or just before? Great question. So when submitting the application for the primary application for verification, we want to have at least included letter writer's information. We're going to need that at least. But for their letter, like uploaded, when we need that is when we're submitting secondaries. Does that help clarify? No problem. And again, everyone's time frame is going to be a little different. So if you were submitting in June, your primary application, we're expecting to go through the verification process, then July is when we would want to have those letters submitted by in order to have them in at the same time you're submitting secondaries. Okay, so why timing matters for submission. Most of our applicants tend to apply to a lot of schools, which means a lot of secondary writing. We do have a secondaries video, which dives in a lot more into details, but as a brief overview, each school could have a few different essays for you to write. And these essays could range from about 500 characters to 1,500 characters or even more. So every school is going to be a little different, and we're managing content, making sure we get feedback so that way it's good writing and it meets the expectations for schools. And we're applying to, you know, maybe 30 med schools or maybe 15 dental schools or, you know, 5 to 10 vet schools, PA, OT, PT, etc. You know, all of that writing kind of adds up. So this is why we're encouraging, let's talk now about strategy. Let's really give us the best chance for success, for timeliness, but also being aware of, you know, helping you not also burn out. That way we can complete all the secondaries that you're going to get, basically. So again, we want to submit when you're ready and early, and then we submit with one school to be verified. You don't need to submit all your schools at once, and we don't necessarily encourage that because that can be really overwhelming to have when we're applying to med school. All 30 secondaries come in a really short period of time in the beginning. Or if we're applying to other schools, right, having to submit and do a lot of writing in order to even submit to those schools. So this is why we encourage doing batches over time in order to help stagger the secondaries you will receive, or in order to just submit the schools that you want to submit to for the schools that embed those secondaries. In general, we do want to encourage secondaries as early as possible. That it's a race to have a complete application, right? So ideally it's August/September or soon. And we're going to talk about how to potentially do those batches in just a second. At the end of the day, there are 1,000,001 ways to do this. There's not necessarily a right way or a wrong way, but the reason why we have a few options here, and there are definitely more options, is we want you to be able to think about what option makes the most sense for you. That way you can continue to make progress and chip away at this versus, oh my gosh, I just got 30 secondaries, or oh my gosh, I'm trying to submit to my 10 plus schools and I feel stuck. I feel overwhelmed. So the goal of having a submission strategy, or the intent, is that we can break up this information over time. That way we can continue to make progress and to submit schools over time. And so a few different options are here on the slide. So option one, we could categorize the secondaries by like easy, medium, challenging. And how do we get those secondaries? We do talk about it in that secondaries video, but schools often recycle their prompts from the previous year that we can find online for med schools. And for other professions, again, usually it's embedded in the primary application that you can see when you pretend to add the school. And then we can kind of chip away and work on all three over time, right? Maybe we're working on maybe 2 easies, 2 mediums, and a challenging per batch that we do. And we continue to work on sending a batch every other week or so, however many weeks that we need to submit the application. Option two could be based on location. For example, if a lot of folks want to stay in California, so maybe we have those California schools first, and then maybe we have some more Western schools, for example, like Nevada or Arizona. And then maybe we move into the Midwest, and then maybe we have the East Coast. And chances are we might have some extra Midwest or other locations that we didn't quite get to in order to help manage having about 5 to 7 schools in each of our batches. And of course, we change that number of schools per batch based on, you know, how much progress are we making / how are you feeling, right? How can we still have quality writing while still making progress? Option three, kind of batches based on fit / compatibility. For example, maybe your dream schools are going in batch one and then kind of continue on based on how much we like that school, how much you think you're fit into that school. This was a lot of information. I just want to check in. Any thoughts or questions?
How long should we spend on each individual batch? Like I've heard different things. Like people will say aim for like 2 weeks to get everything together for your first batch, send that out, and then start working on the next batch.
Excellent question. How long should we spend on a batch? We encourage aiming for about 2 weeks. That way, if it is less time, great. We're going really fast. If it is a little more time because maybe you have a harder secondary or there's like a little bit more questions or maybe something comes up that week, we still have some wiggle room after. So 2 weeks is a pretty good rule of thumb. That way we can continue progressing. And I'll have it in it should be the next slide, but we don't want to wait to receive those secondaries before we start this writing. Again, we want to do that pre-writing. We want to get those prompts ahead of time so that we can make progress during the verification time period and really maximize that time. Again, we talk a lot more about this in the secondaries video as well. Great question. Any other questions? How many essays per secondary should we expect per school? Great question. And honestly, it just really varies. Every school is super different. There's going to be a lot of writing. So it's kind of a brace yourself moment, but knowing that when we have strategies and when we have organization in place, in our experience, it really helps our applicants knowing this in advance to prepare them. We can see, roughly 3 to 5, give or take. Every school is different. The number of characters is different. So it will depend on what the schools want. Definitely feel free to continue those questions in the chat for me. And again, this is really all about how do we maximize verification / how do we just maximize our time in general. During this time, we can also be taking any extra tests that you have. We do have that test video up on our YouTube channel about Casper, Kira, and AAMC preview. This could also be a good time to still be chipping away at that school list, go to events that schools are hosting or HPA is hosting with schools, and continue to doing research. The more research we do on the school list, the better secondaries is going to go, and then the better interviews and communications with schools will also go. So again, the goal is to keep going, and we know that this is a lot, right? Chances are maybe you're graduating and you're wrapping that up, but we're also wrapping up your personal statement, experiences, other application components. We know that there's a lot going on. And again, our goal is to be able to support you throughout this whole journey. So if you realize, hey, it has been a little bit since I've made some more progress, could be a good time to check in. So that way an advisor can kind of help us move forward together. We do have a school list video, but I just wanted to kind of put out into the universe, if you're feeling a little stuck with where to start, we do have our spring break road trip website page, and we also have our pre-health conference page as well. And for both of those, we did have schools participate. For spring break road trip, it was med schools. For pre-health conference, it was across all health professions. And these can be really great schools to start off with. Because these schools really wanted to meet Davis students and alumni. Are these all the schools our students get into? Absolutely not, but this can be a really great starting place. And again, we do talk more about how to create a school list in our video as well. I think I just mentioned this, but it's also here on the slide for your review later, whether we're watching the recording or taking a look at that PDF. And I think we've also really heavily covered this too, like the value of pre-writing our secondaries. It's really to help maximize our time and to help ultimately decrease stress and help smooth out this process for the future, or as much as we can, basically. Again, we want to aim to submit, really we want to get it in by August if possible, or September or sooner. And again, friendly reminder for most health professions like dental, PA, OT, PT, etc. A lot of them embed their secondaries in the primary application. There can still be a few schools that send it in afterwards. They want to see your primary first. And again, we want to be double checking schools' websites to get a handle of, well, who is doing what, and we can keep track of that information on a spreadsheet. Okay. I know we've kind of just went through a lot of content again. Any other thoughts or questions before we continue? Okie dokie. And again, you guys are doing really great. Continue putting thoughts in direct messages or in the chat for us today. This is just a quick sneak peek for interviews. We are going to have a session dedicated to this next week. And we also host interview week in the summer, typically in August. But the reason why I bring it up today is because as we think about next steps, just a friendly reminder that we do encourage interview prep after secondaries. And the reason why is because schools can give us as much notice as like a few months or as little notice as a few days to invite you to an interview. And that can be really scary, right? To get an interview invitation and, they're inviting you to come in a few days. So we want you to be as prepared as possible, which is why we do want to put interview prep on our radar now, why we do have that session next week, and why we take a really deep dive into interview week as well. Ooh, some great questions. Should interview prep be after all secondaries or after each batch of secondaries? Good question. We usually recommend it's towards the tail end of secondaries. So maybe we are almost done, but that's why we have the interview week in about August, because this is usually when folks might start to hear back on interviews. Does HPA have a spreadsheet template to track secondaries? That's a really great question. I'm not sure if we have one for secondaries, but I know that we do have one for school lists, which should be on our app prep program page. But in the school list video, we should be covering topics, or I'm sorry, on the secondaries video, we should be covering topics on how do we stay organized as well. Excellent questions. So, remaining for our conversation today is two big topics: communicating with schools and what else can we be doing, basically. So communicating with schools, has anyone heard of update emails or letters before? Sometimes they're called interest emails. Oh, I see a thumbs up. Any thoughts? Like, what have you heard about this? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat. Some schools allow it, some don't. That's a really good thought. I completely agree. Anything else that you've heard? So this, if you've done additional activities, it's a way to update them. Yes. And so big picture first, it's a way to stay in contact with schools, right? They receive potentially thousands of applications. And how do we help stand out to really show that we are invested in an application with them? And we didn't just like apply because we saw them, or we didn't just apply because we think they're plan B or something. We want to show we are genuinely interested and we would want to go there. So it's true, some schools allow it, some don't. So definitely double check not only their website, but when we do get like emails from schools about updates from them, or if they have a portal for you to log into that's separate from the application, making sure that we're checking what do they say there about updates or being aware of that. This is mostly a strategy for out-of-state schools. California schools, for our California applicants, they do know that a lot of our applicants have that preference of staying in state. So this is really a strategy for the out-of-state schools with, really showing them, again, I didn't just put you on my list because you're a plan B. I am still genuinely interested in going to you as a student. So after your application is complete, we do encourage sending like an update email or an interest email, whatever we want to call it, about every 4 to 6 weeks to schools that do accept communication. If you have met specific admissions persons, whether it's at like an event in person or online, and they gave out their email, sometimes it can also be appropriate to send it to them as well. And so when you do get that like contact info from them, you could also ask like, hey, would you, does your school accept communication after submission? And, yes or no. And then, would it be okay to email you? Every school is going to have a different policy on this, and policies can change year to year. So we do encourage checking in with them if we do get it. But if they say yes, that email can be like gold because they can help push you along in the cycle. The goal is to be brief and concise, and we want to be able to save content for future emails if needed. The goal of sending an interest email or an update email is to get an interview with them if we haven't gotten an interview with them yet. Typically, the first one we're sending is at like the Monday after we've attended pre-health conference, or in October if we don't get a chance to see them at pre-health conference. Ooh, good question. Should we still send updates even if it's stated on the application / something is present or ongoing? And chances are, yes, we would still really want to send them updates if they accept it. That way we can still stay on their radar. So I do have a couple of examples here. Feel free to take a quick picture, or we'll also have that PDF up. And of course, we'll have this recording. But as you notice, these are pretty concise. And a pretty big myth that we see on the internet is that they're like really long. But in reality, admissions folks get a lot of emails, right? So we do want it to be nice and concise and clear that, again, you're invested as an applicant. Any thoughts or questions on update / interest emails? And we do revise this with applicants as well. We highly recommend coming into drop-ins for us to be looking at this content together. This is just one example to do it. These are the words I use. You could totally have different words, but again, the goal is conciseness and be able to show the fit for the school. Give them those reminders to help stand out in the sea of applicants that they might have. So letters of intent. This tends to also come up pretty early every year. And our first word of advice is to be careful. For most professions, we would not want to submit a letter of intent for this calendar year or the calendar year that you're applying, as it would really be too early to be sending that kind of communication to them. If we haven't received an email, if we haven't received an invite to interview, then we would really want to send an interest or an update email instead to, ask for an interview basically. If we are sending a letter of intent, then we would really want it to be after you've interviewed, and usually if we're on the wait list or if we haven't heard anything for a while. So timeline kind of does change every year, and every applicant feels a little different. This past cycle, I have had applicants send it as early as March, but I have had applicants also send it in April and some also planning to send in May. So timeline might be a little different based on each profession you're interested in or that you've applied to, or based on your school, etc. But ideally, we're going to send it after we've had that interview, and we encourage only sending it to one school. When we're sending a letter of intent, it's basically saying that I want to marry you. Right, I want to go to your school. You're my top priority. And we wouldn't want to send that to multiple schools. We wouldn't want them to kind of hear about it from each other, basically. And again, I have another quick example here. And that's definitely something that you could be revising with HPA staff as well during those drop-ins or appointments like we mentioned earlier. Further ways to connect with schools. And again, this is in the next steps category. We definitely encourage considering events hosted by HPA and others, whether that's by the school itself, or there might be an online exhibitor fair by the Association of Schools. If you haven't hit submit on your primary or your secondary yet, you can include those events in your application. This is a chance to ask good questions to not only help you stand out, but to ask questions that you might not be able to find very easily on their website. And I'm going to have a highlight here for pre-health conference now, but I will chat about it at the very end. Pre-health conference and standing out at events is a really great way to also make positive impressions with admissions people. The people going to these events have the power to push your application forward, like getting a secondary or interview and ultimately an acceptance. So this can be a really powerful way to stand out to admissions folks. And for conference specifically, every year we have applicants in the cycle who do make that positive impression, and they get interviews scheduled, that day, that weekend, for the weekend or in the future, because again, that's how big of an impact connecting with schools can make. So some upcoming events that we have are the summer boot camps, again, pre-health conference and info sessions. And when we hear about info sessions, we do put it on our email newsletter. For pre-med specific ones, we do put it specifically on our pre-med bootcamp Facebook page. In order to help prepare our students for info sessions, we do have a great article about it. So I do encourage checking that out. We give tips on how to prepare before, what to do during, and what to do afterwards. And again, we do have the interview at prep session next Thursday. We do have interview week in August, and we also have mock interview days. One of them at the end of interview week, typically in August, and we typically have 2 mock interviews in fall quarter, all virtual. For those mock interviews in fall quarter, we typically have one dedicated to our pre-vets to help them. And then we have one for our pre-health students in general. And then the interview week one is also for everyone, pre-health in general. So definitely be on the lookout for that. If you are already on the applicant listserv, you will get updates on, when are those dates going to be, or when does registration open, and those kinds of things. I do just have a quick shout out, why do we recommend going to boot camps? If you haven't hit submit on that secondary application yet, that could potentially play a role in your secondary application when talking about schools that you've heard from. It could also help give you good insights when meeting like health professional students who might be on a panel or who might be speaking that day. I do just really want to emphasize it's a really great time to hear from schools that we invite, whether they're on a panel or they're just doing a solo info session as a part of boot camp. We can get insights on their timeline, like when do they start interviewing or giving acceptances, etc. Getting insight into how their interview looks, like what do they do, like what kind of style. And again, can include it in the secondary, especially if we learn really great things about them, if we do get that chance to ask good questions, right? Like what patient populations do they serve, or could they share more about the things that they've highlighted on their website, like what organizations they have, or other things that might interest you or help show how you align with that school. Registrations for boot camps are all up and open. I can have those links at the end today. And lastly, but not leastly, again, our pre-health conference that happens every fall. This year, it is Saturday, November 2nd, 2024, and registration is officially open for attendees. It's the largest pre-health event in the nation, hosted at UC Davis in person by UC Davis. It is overseen by HPA staff, but really a lot of the coordinating, a lot of the work is done by our students, UC Davis students. And so this event is also with our UC Davis students in mind, right? With what schools do we invite? What workshop topics are we doing? What health, it's a variety of health professionals, but even like what topic are we inviting health professionals to come and speak on? And so as a sneak peek, our exhibitors fair, we typically have over 200 exhibitors across the health professions. And last year, oh, I need to update this. We had about 50 or so medical schools last year. And just like how I mentioned earlier, we do have the digital program up on the pre-health conference website for you to see what schools came. And so that's the morning, the pre-health fair. The afternoon, we have workshops for you all to go to. This is still a chance to hear from schools again, whether they're on panels or they're doing kind of their own sessions. And it's also a chance to hear from other experts like health professionals. And while it might feel like, hey, I'm in the cycle or I'm later in my journey, it's still again a good chance to get insights from them, but also to hear more about, what were their pathways like? What do you want your pathway to look like? Do those match, or does it give you ideas to help strengthen our writing, but also again help prepare us for interviews as well? So registration is open. You can scan this QR code. You can also go to the pre-health conference website page. It's going to be right at the top. It says attendee registration. In our experience, attendees who register earlier are often more prepared because they're usually keeping up with which schools are being added over time. What kinds of questions would I ask them? And again, I really want to highlight every year we have a lot of applicants who receive interviews and ultimately acceptances because they were able to make a positive impression with admissions folks this day. So we really want as many applicants and as many UC Davis students to go as possible, even if you're not an applicant, because this is how we start building those relationships with admissions folks and building a greater application to be more competitive. So we can't emphasize enough how great of an event this is. And again, it's hosted at UC Davis by UC Davis students. So I really hope to see you there. You'll probably see me and other staff running around. I'm just gonna hit stop share, or I'm sorry, stop recording.